Hey everybody, Ray here. Today I'm going to show you how to make the best cookies that I have ever had. We call them MUMSY'S cookies, but more on MUMSY later. Let's first go over the ingredients. The first ingredient you will need is a half cup of rolled oats, and you want these to be kind of fine. Now you can get them fine by putting them in a blender, or you can do what I did. Just put the oats in a baggie and go over them with a roller, and it pulverizes them down very well. You're going to need two and a quarter cups of flour. You're going to need 1 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 3/4 cup of packed brown sugar, 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, 2 softened sticks of butter. You will need 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla, and for something like cookies, I only use pure vanilla extract. You're going to need 1/2 teaspoon of lemon juice, 2 eggs, 3 cups of semi-sweet chocolate chips, and 1.5 cups of walnuts, chopped walnuts. Now you can get the chopped walnuts in the store already chopped up for you, but to me they're just chopped up too fine. So I like to chop them up myself so I have bigger chunks of nuts in my cookies. The only thing you want to make sure to do is you want to chop them first and then measure the 1.5 cups, because if you measure the 1.5 cups with full walnuts, they just take up so much more volume that it's really not quite a 1.5 cups. So chop them first, then measure your 1.5 cups, and then use them. Okay, that's the ingredients. Now we'll move on to the next steps. The first thing we want to do is to start to get our butter creamed in our blender. Dump our sticks in there. We'll start our blender up on low at first. And we'll just let that cream the butter for a little while. While that's working, we will combine our dry ingredients. So we've got our flour, we've got our oats, our salt, and our baking soda. Now I will put all of the ingredients in the exact instructions down in the description below, so you don't have to worry about keeping up with that. And then while that's blending, we'll just start to mix our dry ingredients together. While we're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about MUMSY. So MUMSY decided that she really liked the DoubleTree cookies. If you've ever stayed at a DoubleTree hotel, when you check in, the first thing they do is give you a nice, warm, thick, chocolate, nutty cookie. They are fabulous. And MUMSY really liked those cookies, so she decided she was going to develop a recipe to try to get as close as she could to the DoubleTree cookies. Well, I can tell you that in my opinion, she didn't get close. She raised the bar on DoubleTree. She made them better. And MUMSY is a friend of mine's mother. And for some reason, and I don't even remember why, among the group of friends, we just endearingly started to refer to her as MUMSY. And it sort of stuck. Now we always, when we talk about our friend's mother, it's MUMSY. So that's how we got the term MUMSY. And that's how MUMSY came up with this recipe, by experimenting again and again to develop these chocolate chip cookies with walnuts that are absolutely fantastic. Now, this is starting to cream up a little bit, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put our brown sugar in there, and we're going to put our granulated sugar in there, and we're going to let those all kind of cream together for a little while. Now, on occasion, what you might have to do is stop the blender and go in there and wipe some of the butter down that gets stuck on the tines as it goes around. It's no big deal. Just stop it, go down. You see I've got almost a whole stick of butter that got stuck on there, which is no big deal. We'll just kind of push it down into the sugars, and then we'll start it up again. But you might have to do that a couple of times while you're making these cookies. So we'll let those blend up a little bit. I'll blend the dry ingredients a little bit more, and then I'll bring you back. Now I've scraped our bowl down a little bit and we're ready to start mixing in some of the other ingredients. I'm going to go ahead and add the cinnamon. This is the lemon juice and the vanilla. I will add that in. And then I'll add in my 2 eggs. So there's our 2 eggs. Now we're going to let this blend together for just a little bit. And then when I come back, we'll start adding our dry ingredients. Now I've let this mix together for probably about 3 minutes. And you can see that it's starting to get pretty smooth. So what we're going to do now is just slow it back down just a little bit. And I'm going to start adding in the dry ingredients. And what you're going to find is, as you add in these dry ingredients, it's going to start to get pretty darn stiff. And at some point, before I add the chips and the nuts, I'll actually switch to a dough hook. I kind of mix a little at a time, give it a chance to hydrate a bit, and then I'll add some more. Now, Mumsy left us a few years ago, but I've always been convinced when I'm making these cookies, Mumsy somehow is looking down on me from heaven and watching every move that I make. So I try to be pretty consistent to her recipe. Now we've got the dry ingredients all in there, except for the chips and the nuts, which will be added last. And you can see that it's now starting to get to be a pretty kind of thick batter, more almost like a bread dough kind of. It gets pretty thick. So we're going to stop this and just scrape it down a little bit, get some off of the tines here, and give it a chance to mix just a little bit better before I start adding the other ingredients, which I will do again by changing to the dough hook. So when it starts to look to me like it's getting a little bit too thick to use this particular mixer implement on it, then what I do is I'll drop it down, I'll clean this off, and I'll replace it with the dough hook. Now I've replaced the paddle with the dough hook, and we're going to start to mix in our nuts and our chocolate chips. Now here is one of actually the only place where I vary a little bit from Mumsy's instructions, because Mumsy says to do this by hand. But that darn dough is so thick, I think Mumsy had a lot stronger hands and wrists than I did. So I usually just use that dough hook and blend it in that way. So we'll blend in our nuts. We'll let those mix in a little bit. I'll probably clean down the sides of the bowl again to make sure that it gets mixed pretty well. But it's doing okay in there. Now we'll start to mix in our chips. Uh-oh, one fell on the counter. Too bad. 2. Bonus. All right. Those are starting to mix in pretty well. But I'm going to lower it down and mix in the sides a little bit more. Then I'll let that dough hook work on a little bit, and then I will finish mixing by hand just to make sure that I've got a pretty good distribution of the nuts and chips. All right, that dough hook has a good start for us. So we're going to go ahead, take that off. And then we will mix this a little bit more by hand. Let me move this camera over here so you can see it a little bit better, because I want you to appreciate how thick that dough is when you're trying to mix it in that bowl. It is really, really a heavy dough. See how heavy that is? I'm just going to put it into a smaller bowl because it needs to be refrigerated overnight. Now, you don't have to take it out of the bowl. I mean, you could just leave it in this mixing bowl. I prefer to take it out because I want to go ahead and clean all my blender stuff here and put it away. So I go ahead and take it out of this bowl. Then I will cover this with plastic wrap. And this will sit overnight in the refrigerator. So there it is, all set to go. We're going to pop this into the fridge. We'll be back tomorrow. We've let our cookie dough sit overnight in the refrigerator. I've started my oven to preheat at 325 degrees. Now we're going to weigh out the cookies into the portions that we want to bake them in. The portion is 1.6 ounces. So I just kind of break my dough up with a spoon and then I put pieces on the scale until I get to that 1.6 ounces. I would suggest that you use a scale for this because you want your cookies to be fairly uniform in size and in weight so they'll all bake up about the same after they come out of the oven. So continue to do that, leaving about 2 inches between each one of the pieces of cookie dough. It's going to need room to spread out before you put it in the oven. You will get 12 of the clumps of cookie dough on a large baking sheet like this. This will probably make 3 to 4 baking sheets, so that's 12, 24, it's 36 to 48 cookies. This makes a lot of cookies. You don't have to worry about how many you make because you can freeze them. When you take them out of the freezer, you just pop them in the microwave for a little bit and they taste great. So we have a batch ready to go into the oven. I bake one pan at a time because oven temperatures are going to vary based on whether it's on the bottom or the top. I do it in the middle rack and I do one tray at a time. So it's probably going to take 45 minutes or an hour to get all of the cookies baked. I've already got a second sheet ready to go. So at this point, I'll just stand by until that first sheet comes out. I'll let it cool off a little bit, take the cookies off of there, and while I'm doing that, I'll put the next tray in there to bake, and I'll just rotate through my 2 baking pans. One thing to bear in mind is, what I found the first few times I made this recipe was that I would always think, you know, they don't quite look done. They look too soft. And so I would bake them for a couple of minutes longer. That doesn't make sense. 13 to 15 minutes is fine. I'm going to bake mine at 14 minutes. I've been talking for a minute, so I'm going to set my timer for 13 minutes. All right, we're in, we're baking. I'll bring you back when they're done and I'll show you what they look like. Well, here's the finished batch of cookies. They wound up baking for about 15 minutes to get the best texture. Obviously, ovens vary, so your time may be a little bit more or a little bit less. Don't overcook these though, because you want them to be nice and soft in the center and still kind of chewy on the outside. These came out just perfect. And you can see that when you break them open, there's lots of nuts, chocolate chip. It's just the perfect cookie, in my opinion. Thank you, Mumsy, for leaving us this great recipe. Hey, I hope you liked this video. If you did, don't forget, leave me a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm to want to share my videos with more people, and I appreciate that. Oh. Fantastic.